This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. Communities across North Dakota can see big possibilities for education, infrastructure, conservation, and more. The state's oil and natural gas industry helps make them happen. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. Joining me now is North Dakota Indian Affairs Commissioner Scott Davis. Scott, how are you?
I'm good, Rob. Thanks for having me. Good day.
I wanted to have you on to discuss, some interesting things that are happening. Certainly at the national level, we have an incoming president, or a new presidential administration, and I guess they're incoming now. They're no longer transitioning. They are in office. President Joe Biden and his cabinet and his people, and they are starting off with a bang. We're seeing a lot of executive orders right off the bat, many of them fulfilling what I would describe as the hostility to oil and gas development that Mr. Biden's campaign gave voice to during the campaign. We've seen they've pulled the permit that was issued for the Keystone XL pipeline to cross the Canadian-American border. There's certainly a risk to the Dakota Access Pipeline project. I think a lot of people are watching that. We got some news today with an appeals court upholding a lower court ruling that pipeline needs further environmental review, although there's not yet a decision on whether or not its existing permit is going to be pulled. And now we're hearing that the Biden administration this week plans to halt new fossil fuel leasing, that would be oil and gas leasing, on federal land and water. This is from the Washington Post. I quote, President Biden is poised to impose a moratorium on new federal oil and gas leasing Wednesday, according to three people briefed on the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity because the plan was still being finalized. The move will deliver on one of Biden's boldest climate change pledges, but will encounter stiff resistance from the fossil fuel industry. Now, here in North Dakota, outside of our tribal lands, we don't have a lot of federal land in the state. And certainly not a lot of federal land where oil and gas leasing is taking place outside of the tribal land. So I think obviously, this administration's hostility towards oil and gas development is a little scary for North Dakota. But when it comes to this policy specifically, there's a real risk here for our tribal friends who get a huge amount of revenue and see a huge amount of oil and gas development on their lands, particularly the three affiliated tribes, the MHA Nation, as we call them. They represent what, Scott? About 20% of North Dakota oil production? Is that? I know that number fluctuates a bit, but about a fifth, I think.
Yeah, that's a good ballpark estimate, Rob. About 20%.
And what are you hearing right now? You're obviously the state's liaison with the tribes. They're hearing this. We've seen some tribes in other parts of the country. The Ute Indian tribe they have gone and they have written a letter to the Biden administration, saying essentially that they're upset about Executive Order 3395. About energy permits and approvals on Indian lands. So what are you hearing? The MHA Nation, I know, gets a huge amount of revenue from oil and gas production. What are you hearing?
Yeah, frustration, Rob, first and foremost. I think frustration and probably, somewhat anticipated a little bit, but hoping it wouldn't come to this point because we were notified too, I think, of the Interior's letter on January 20th, about 6 days ago, that they were going to cease and halt, all gas and oil permits and so forth too. So obviously, I sent that message to Chairman Fox and his team, and of course they knew about it too. But it's going to send a big ripple effect, not only with MHA, their members, their members. I would say their royalty members as well, people who get royalties from oil and gas, private landowners up on the reservation. And it's not good. It's not good. And this has always been my frustration with how government treats in the country, Rob. when we think about and know in law that government, in this case, the Interior, has a trust responsibility to our tribal nations and to our members. Trust responsibility means basically you work for us, not the other way around. And so I know there's a number of executive orders and policies that were implemented early on the Obama administration, talking about consultation. One in particular, that any move that the government, in this case Interior or otherwise, would be issuing or contemplating a new policy of some sort, they would first consult with the tribes, making sure that, hey, the tribes agree or disagree or what have you. And that obviously was not done in this process. And so here you get a letter from the Interior Department saying, hey, we're going to halt all your oil and gas production until further notice. It's just like, where is this coming from? And we know how expensive it is to shut down and to restart,
Sure.
oil and gas in the state, and let alone nations. So, and then the letter from the Ute tribe, I've seen that, and they make a very, very good point. It's a direct attack on their economy.
Yeah,
their
I
sovereignty,
can actually quote from that letter to your point. I quote, "Your order is a direct attack on our economy, sovereignty, and our right to self-determination. Indian lands are not federal public lands. Any action on our lands and interests can only be taken after effective tribal consultation." And that's such a point. When we're talking about, tribal lands are not like, some national park, right?
Exactly.
It's land. There's a government there. There are actual human beings who live there. You make your own laws. You have they have their own. The various tribal governments have their. They're governments, right? And obviously there's a unique relationship between the federal that we don't need to go into. Everybody's aware of that. But how you can go issuing orders like this that will have a huge consequence for how tribal communities use the resources that are on their lands. Has anybody from MHA, to your knowledge, spoken with anybody in the Biden administration where they consulted about this?
To my knowledge, no. And I know we have a meeting with Chairman Fox and his some of his staff and a couple of council members coming up here shortly with myself and the governor talk about this legislation. So I'm sure that'll come up, in what he's heard and what he hasn't heard. But again, Rob, I go back to tribes' choice, as sovereign nations if they want to develop oil and energy, coal. I'll use the example of the Crow tribe out in Montana. That's their choice.
Yeah.
If tribes like my tribe in Stand Rock choose otherwise to go green energy, what have you, wind, solar, great. And
that's
as
also
a federal
their choice.
agency,
yeah,
that's your choice. And as a government agent, you should do everything you can within your powers to support tribal choices on that. And that's the way it should be.
You know me. I'm a pro oil person. I think we're all using it. It's an extremely valuable resource. I think the way we develop it in North Dakota, we do a very good job of it. Not perfect, but I think we do about as good a job as you could possibly do. And again, we're all using this stuff, right? We're all using the gas. We're all using the oil. So this idea that we're just going to shut it down and start using what exactly? That frustrates me. I'm very pro oil. I want to develop, and I want to develop responsibly. All of that being said, if the MHA Nation tomorrow announced that, hey, we've had it with oil, we don't want any more oil, they're not going to do that. But if they did, they decided through their tribal governments decided to make that decision, then the reaction from the rest of us is, okay, we got to respect that. It's their land, right? It's not my land; it's their land.
Yep.
The tribe.
Exactly.
I wouldn't agree with it. I might be critical of it. I might say, boy, you guys are being foolhardy, which I'm allowed to do. But gosh, that's their right. They can do that, and the federal government would have no business stepping in and telling them, hey, you have to develop oil. And maybe that's a useful way of thinking about this. What if we were talking about a tribe that had significant oil or gas resources, or maybe like coal resources, and the federal government came in and said, hey, tribe, you have to develop these resources. We're going to pass an executive order, and you have to develop them. How would we all feel about that? Because I'll tell you, I wouldn't feel comfortable about that, and I don't feel comfortable about this.
Yeah. Either do we. Even for myself personally, my personal leanings, is why I've always been very anti-big government. That's just how I am, Rob. And this is an example. These are the reasons why, you have DC telling tribal nations what they can or cannot do. And it goes back to like education. My dad, we were raised in an educational home, and My dad used to be staunch, tribal sovereignty, and that's how we grew up.
Yeah.
We should be able to teach our own children, educational curriculum the way we see fit. Going back to local control, what have you. It's the same way with our tribes.
Yeah.
As sovereign nations, but yet you have, big brother government that comes in and says, nope, you can't do that because of some one size fits all cookie cutter policy that's supposed to work for all of it in the country, and it doesn't. And I go back to the 12 energy producing tribes in America. All these tribes, they also sent a letter stating the same thing. Hey, you need to consult with us under your own policies, under your own executive orders. You need to do this, and they're not to develop, our own economies.
Yeah.
At our own choice.
Speaking about this as a national issue, how many? I got to think there aren't a lot of tribes that produce as much energy as the MHA nation does from their tribal lands. I mean, there can't. MHA's got to be kind of at the top of that list, right? Of tribes that, in terms of producing resources. To your knowledge, I mean, are they number one, or how are they in relation to other tribes?
Yeah, I think they're definitely at the top. Probably the Ute tribe would be a close second, I would say. But they have a lot to say. I mean, and I'm always been glad how they exercise their sovereignty. And of course, with MHA, fighting the state on a lot of issues. I mean, that's good. I mean, chairman, leaders like Chairman Fox,
Absolutely.
They give a very solid argument of how they should be able to exercise their own mineral rights and their ownership of their land, their metals, and so forth too. So
there's always
that's the way it should be.
There's always push and pull in government to government relationships, and again, that's how it should be. The state of North Dakota has a responsibility to its constituents. The MHA Nation tribal government has a responsibility to its tribal members, its constituents, and that's how it is. And I don't ever begrudge MHA. I mean, I always agree with them, but I mean, they're doing what they think is best for the people, and great. But here we have, again, the federal government just swooping in, and a president who's been in office a matter of days is now, potentially. Let's talk about that for a minute, by the way. Let's say that tomorrow the Biden administration says, all right, no more oil and gas leasing on MHA tribal lands, understanding that there may be, let's say that went into effect, and setting aside the fact that there's probably going to be legal challenges and everything else if that happens. What would the impact be to the MHA nation be socially and economically?
Oh, huge. It would set them back, 30 years, 20 years. Even in this pandemic, talking with Chairman Fox a lot on the CARES Act, you set them back at least almost 2 years on how much the pandemic has set them back, and so forth too. So, this infrastructure that they have built on their own, it took a long time, almost a decade to build. That takes a long time. We know how much infrastructure is needed, especially when you have, cross jurisdiction or checkerboard of infrastructure. Sometimes you got to take the long route around certain things and so forth. But and the time it takes to get the permits and so forth. I mean, these things don't take, they don't happen overnight. So when you talk about at least 10 years of infrastructure that the MHA has done, to benefit from their own resources, is going to be a huge detriment to their tribe's economy, and even the state for that matter, because we do share in some of that tax revenue.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a huge ripple effect, not just with the tribal members, the landowners, but even us as state citizens.
Well, I think that's true. If any, when the folks on MHA suffer, the state of North Dakota suffers. They are our neighbors. They are
Absolutely.
our friends. Our interests are inextricably intertwined. So, if they hurt, we hurt. If we hurt, they hurt, and that's not good for any of us. So, give us a picture. How much revenue does MHA Nation make from oil? And obviously with COVID, it's been a roller coaster. I don't know if you have updated numbers, but I mean, it's a lot.
It's a lot. I don't know the exact numbers, Rob. I would be very hesitant to disclose any of that. Even if I knew, I just wouldn't. That's their call on that one.
Okay,
But it is a lot. I
Okay.
know their impact. I know they've done economic impact studies. You may want to research of how much of their economic impact they have contributed to the state of North Dakota, taxes and buying power. I mean, a lot of the residents live down here in the Bismarck-Mandan area. They buy homes, they shop, there's a lot. There's a huge, and then all the buckets of their tax, of our tax revenues. They go to education buckets. They go for other buckets that we have that fund a lot of state projects, through tax revenue for our state too. So it's going to have a big trickle effect again. If this thing keeps going the way we think it's going. I hope it's not going that way, but I hope they can rein them back in and rein the interior back in and saying, hey, you just can't, turn the light switch on and off at your, at a whim, and you need to consult the tribes and support the tribes on their own energy development. That's their choice. That's your trust responsibility. And those are treaty rights. And I've always felt that way since, learning or paying attention to these things in my early 20s. And I was taught well by people like Charlie Murphy, J. Takel, and I had a lot of great tribal leaders in my growing up that I worked for. They always were about sovereignty. My father too, sovereignty, local control, as we say it here. Let us determine what we should be able to develop, not develop at our own way. So that's who I am, and I totally agree with what MHA is trying to do here, and the other tribes for that matter, throughout America. Because again, that is their economy, that is their jobs, that's their businesses. And you look at the infrastructure up at MHA, I mean, the buildings, the things they've developed down here in the Bismarck-Mandan area with treatment centers. Those are all from oil and gas that they chose to develop, And
not to mention the businesses in tribal communities on MHA lands. I mean, because if you have oil activity going there, you got people coming, from outside. They're coming there to work. They're staying in hotels. They're shopping at stores. They're doing all sorts of stuff that also generates revenue and creates jobs and does all sorts of wonderful things for the community. So what I realize that you have a meeting coming up with Chairman Mark Fox, as you mentioned, and I imagine this is going to be a topic of discussion again, as you mentioned. What levers, understanding that I guess we don't necessarily know what the MHA Nation is going to do at this point, what could they do? What levers do they have to push back on this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, aside from what we can control here in our state between the legislative processes and the tribe, I think that's one starting point that we can look at. Because for years we talked about other tax sharing agreements like alcohol, tobacco, motor fuels and so forth too. So I know that'll be on the docket when we do talk with Chairman Fox and his team. But nationally, how can we work together with our congressional teams and working with the president, the Interior Department, and the other tribes for that matter, the other 12 producing tribes with their congressmen, Congress people in supporting tribal energy in America. I think that's another approach we need to look at. I know the governor is part of the Western Government Association, so I think there's a place in that area to hopefully pull some leverage for DC. But so those are a couple areas I think of where we can help support the tribes and making sure that these things ain't shut down.
It's frustrating, and I know tribes can obviously speak with their own voice in a government to government relationship, but it frustrates me, and obviously our federal delegation represents all North Dakotans, not just folks on tribal lands, and folks on tribal lands, they elect state legislators too, and they're members of the state of North Dakota as well. So all of those things, the state of North Dakota is, I know, your boss, Governor Burgum, is going to do what he can. I think our federal delegation is going to do everything they can to fight on this. But it's a little frustrating that the tribal governments have to sort of rely on those people to carry their message, right? And I say that, again, knowing full well, Senator Kramer, Senator Hoeven, Congressman Armstrong, they represent tribal members too. Tribal members vote for them or vote in those elections and vote for them. It's just frustrating to me that there's not a more direct method of tribes standing up and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're just going to flick off our oil and gas production that we approve, that we've governed through our tribal governments. You're just going to turn it off like a light switch. That's frustrating to me. There should be a better way and we're probably veering off into long-standing wrongs. But that frustrates me that there's not a more direct approach for that.
Yeah, and back in the day, I think early on in my career, we used to have like entities like the National Congress of American Indians, NCI, that would kind of be the lead lobbyist for us in the country, And even them, in my personal opinion, they kind of shifted away from, kind of another trust responsibility, if you will, and kind of just went on their own and really, totally against fossil fuels. And I'm like, man, here we go again. Where you have tribes, 12, like I said, 12 tribes in America that are really, producing a lot of energy for our country and for the tribe. You need to really support that, even though you don't personally believe in it.
Yeah.
But your job as an agent and you're as a NCI official, you're paid to do that. You're a paid lobbyist.
Well, if you believe in tribal sovereignty, then you gotta you gotta believe in tribal sovereignty.
Exactly.
Right. Even if you disagree,
exactly.
I don't like Standing Rock's position on oil and gas development. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very critical of them, but I respect their right to take that position. And I would never support any effort to try to force something on them that they didn't want to do. So that's that's frustrating. Anything else on this, Scott? I mean, I think a lot of this is we're all waiting to see what the what the order is going to look like. I don't know if maybe it'll exempt tribal lands. What's the likelihood of that, do you think? I mean, could he possibly?
That'd be nice. That'd be nice to have an exemption in that somewhere, for tribal lands, going back to trust responsibility and adhering to their own policies. That would be very nice.
Yeah.
Whether it's coal, natural gas, and whatever, what have you. But I'm also worried too, that this could set a precedent for other policies of like education. Again, I'm a big education guy. I mean, I grew up in an education setting, and again, when you have the BIE in this case, almost mandating some desk in DC mandating a curriculum of how to teach Indian schools or Indian children across America. That's my other worry. So is this going to trickle in other areas? Now forcing tribes to teach and because I'll say this, Rob, in my personal experience, tribes in America are the highest, most regulated. I don't know what the right word is. People in America, we're regulated to death on this stuff. We're just strapped because we always have to get permission from a certain office, a certain chain, up to chain command before, and that's just totally wrong. I've always opposed that, always will, and let us have that freedom. BIA, get out of the way. All the other agencies, get out of the way. Just let us, exercise our sovereignty and let us choose as a fit government to, have self-determination for economies, for jobs, for whatever. So I hope that's the view of this Biden administration, but we'll see. We'll see. It's early on, but this policy coming out of the chute is not good for MHA and the other tribes in America regarding their sovereignty and their self-determination.
Scott, I thank you for your time.
You bet, Rob. Thank you.